All right, we got a lot of chaos here at the White House, apparently, at least if you listen to the mainstream media these days. And there have been a lot of high-profile departures, certainly, as of late. But the firing of VA Secretary David Shulkin is not necessarily part of that chaos, right? If you're going to call it chaos, because he was fired because he spent $120,000 of our money, taxpayer money, on a trip with his wife to Europe, and then he lied about it, as well as improperly accepting Wimbledon tickets. So Shulkin was also increasingly isolated and ineffectual at the VA, and that's not going to work because we need the VA to do well. So I don't know as the president entirely had a choice. He kind of had to fire him, right? Well, there are legitimate questions about whether the president's pick of his physician there at the White House, Ronnie Jackson, can actually do the job. But after all, isn't that what a confirmation process is for? Shouldn't a president be able to fire an underperforming cabinet secretary without the wrath of the mainstream media? Not nowadays. Joining me right now, the host of MediaBuzz on the Fox News channel, Howard Kurtz. He is the author of the brand new book, Media Madness, Isn't It Madness? Donald Trump, the press, and the war over the truth. Howie, congrats on the book. That's great.
Thank you so much.
I know how much work that takes, and you certainly had a lot of good material, though. So
that's for sure.
I look forward to reading it. Let me ask you here about what's going on with Shulkin, though, because it kind of seemed like he had to go. And I thought the media would have kind of said, okay, good, he's out. Because, you know, a guy who's spending $120K of taxpayer money on a trip to Europe, it doesn't really belong there.
Right. Well, of course, that was mentioned in sort of the lower parts of some newspaper stories. It wasn't just the being spanked by the inspector general. He was sort of openly at war with some of his own aides, and he's fighting the president, who wants to speed up the privatization of some VA services. As you know, everybody knows, it's a lumbering, cumbersome, dysfunctional bureaucracy. Well, a president should be entitled to replace a cabinet member who's fighting him on priorities. Now, as you say, there are legitimate questions about whether his personal physician has the management experience to take on this bureaucracy. But it just seemed to me, I turned the TV and I would see White House in disarray, more White House chaos, because that's the knee-jerk narrative.
Why? I mean, is it... What does this stem from? And I know you get into this in your book. Is it simply that there's many people that really, you know, fundamentally are part of the left, or are they part of the swamp that are in the media business? I mean, why do they hate him as much as they do? And I understand, by the way, Howie, I get that he's polarizing and he makes some bad choices occasionally in terms of what he decides to tweet or who he decides to go after. But you know, if you look at it objectively from just a policy perspective, and as we always say, we're not red, we're not blue, we're green. I think Neil coined that phrase. If you just look at the policy, a lot of it's pretty decent. So why do they hate him?
Because it goes beyond policy. The disaffection, sometimes resentment, sometimes outright hostility in many quarters of the mainstream media toward Donald Trump is almost visceral, and a lot of it has to do with his style. Oh my God, he fired Rex Tillerson, even though they disagreed on just about every foreign policy issue, and he did it by tweet. Well, maybe he shouldn't have done it by tweet. And there has been, as you say, a lot of turnover. I see stories today because Hope Hicks left yesterday. She was widely praised. How will the White House survive without Hope Hicks? I think they'll find a way. And so it is just, my objection is to the way in which the stories are framed. There's always going to be a chaos story the next day, the next week, rather than, you know, looking at the merits of, well, Shulkin accomplished some good things, but he was at odds with the president, and they were really at odds over this question of privatization.
You know, it seems to me that the media has its thesis, and they just look at things that are happening that they can then fit into that thesis as opposed to what's actually happening. It has to fit their narrative.
You know what didn't fit the thesis? Expelling 60 Russian diplomats on Monday, the largest ever, even including the Cold War.
So there's no coverage?
Well, it was coverage for a few hours, and it was on the front pages the next day. But then it vanished because it didn't fit the thesis that President, in the view of many journalists, is soft on Russia. Wow. And so that story vanished, and instead there were more stories about the Russia investigation, and then, of course, the firing of Shulkin.
And Stormy Daniels along the way as well.
Oh, yeah, there was that story, too, I think.
Howie, it's good to see you. Thank you so much.
Trish.